All right, we are back and trickling in. It's kind of crazy right now with the holidays. So, Ian, thank you so much for coming by.
Of course.
I'm trying to keep this going no matter what, thick or thin, whether I'm here or not, or Nate's doing it. I don't care. Well, we've got black Eric, white Eric, whatever works. I really love this panel, and I think it's an awesome place to hang out. Now, I know you don't have a full time anyway, so let's get your story in. You said you wanted to talk about the wire, and this, oh God, this just seems like typical shenanigans of the government. And while we're talking about, we've got to talk about the whole concept of disinformation and misinformation and what happened to that crazy thing called truth.
I totally agree. It's either true or not.
So what is going on with this?
Well, thanks so much, Eric. Thanks for also providing this forum because, us lawyers, a lot of times we have lunch or whatever, and we're talking like we're nerds out there. And we love to talk to the public and kind of inform them about how some of these concepts really do impact their lives and kind of transitioning to the Daily Wire versus the Department of State. We got to talk about this case. I did a X post on it, got very little fanfare. It's so funny. I think it's hard for people to understand how much impact the government is really coming in with our lives, intruding in our lives. And this is one of those examples. So good example, to talk about this case, Daily Wire, the Federalist. I think most people who are watching know about the Daily Wire, conservative kind of media conglomerate company. It started way back, I think in 2016, got some investments from some billionaire Wilkes brothers. And then we're able to start kind of have this kind of, they do books and they do movies now. They certainly do social media with Ben Shapiro. Candace Owens. And then the Federalist, of course, is an online magazine, a conservative kind of magazine. It's also a podcast. And what they've done is they've sued the Department of State. Now, just for people out there who aren't familiar with federal lawsuits, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes you're not suing who you really allege created this problem. So you're not naming President Joe Biden in the lawsuit. What you're naming is an executive agency that carried out the orders and directions of the chief executive. So that's what was done here. So it's not the most sexy, name for a lawsuit, Daily Wire versus Department of State, but it is a sexy lawsuit in a lot of ways. The bottom line is the facts are that way back when, I think in President Obama's time, there was the creation of the Global Engagement Center and kind of had a good purpose. I mean, what it really was to do was to fight foreign intervention in the internet. We had these problems where we had Russians or, Chinese or North Koreans or whatever really infiltrated the internet, changing our functions, stealing money, stealing secrets. And so they wanted to create this kind of initiative, an agency within the Department of State to kind of fight this foreign propaganda, these foreign lies. So sounds good to me, kind of back then, especially we didn't know what was going on. Well, again, to fill in the public, how it works is when you create one of these little agencies, these groups, they don't like go to work. Eric and I are, writing our notes and doing the work. No. What they do is they contract out with the private sector. They do that for a number of reasons. Sometimes it's just cheaper, right? We advocate contracting. It's good. If I would rather have a contractor who's trying to make ends meet do something than a government service person that oftentimes doesn't have that kind of urgency or desire to complete the work product sufficiently.
So you can shorten and extend accordingly rather than having somebody on payroll with benefits until the end of time and then laying them off. You say, okay, you're contracted for a year. Oh, I saw more at 6 months. And then there's an end in sight, technically.
Absolutely. So they did that. The Global Engagement Center, we may refer to it as GEC, that's what we refer to in the complaint, contracted with Park Capital Investment Group, LLC. Now, I want to make sure that everyone understands these are the allegations of the complaint. In federal court, generally, you're not required to verify those allegations. So there's no one who's swearing to the truth of these allegations. These are merely the statements they believe they can prove. But it's sufficient in the public record that you can find these entities, you can find some of these facts. So so they invest in this company called Park Capital Investment Group, which is weird because most government contracts, there's some relationship, Lockheed Martin, there's some sort of connection between a person or an entity that's known for doing a certain purpose. You're not doing these kind of like Park Capital LLC type transactions if you're really trying to not, you're trying to do it to really obfuscate what's going on. They give him $3 million to do some of this work. Now, Congress's authority with respect to this GEC was, listen, foreign propaganda, foreign lies. Okay. So that was the direction. And that what ended up happening is this Park Capital Investment Group created this disinformation cloud. This is one of the first times in American history that we really have embedded in government this disinformation, phrase. It was actually embedded in government regulations and statute. And the bottom line was it wasn't fighting lies. It was fighting propaganda, things we don't want Americans to know, things that we don't think are appropriate given the administration, which at the time was President Obama. And then from Park, I keep messing up the name, Park Capital Investment Group, they also contracted out with a number of other private sector companies, which is not totally unusual, to create a platform, kind of an electronic platform where they would come up with fact-checking technologies, media literacy tools, social network mapping, machine learning, artificial intelligence. This is back in 2013. I mean, this is kind of the beginning of it all. And initially they were saying was to fight foreign states and to combat propaganda. But we don't have this information. It's not in the complaint, but it appears that during the time of, right when Obama was leaving office, the direction became, listen, we don't want to just fight foreign propaganda. We actually want to fight kind of all propaganda that inhibits the message of the administration at the time. And they kind of rationalize it. And you can see how they could have done this by saying, there's lots of foreign propaganda that starts in Tennessee. So we can't just go, okay, we can't fight anything in America proper. We gotta kind of go a little bit deeper. So what ended up happening, I don't mean to go on and on and on, but what happened is the message from the administration, and it went through the Trump administration and certainly to the Biden administration, was that there was a message that the administration wanted to provide to the American public. And the job of the GEC and all the different entities was to make sure that message was heard and was to meet with private sector social media platforms and was to communicate that message. And then also was to generate a blacklist of journalists and individuals, frankly, anybody who they believed were more likely, they called them risky, more likely to spread disinformation and misinformation. And in my Twitter post, you can see right there, there's an actual list. It might be too hard to share my screen, but bottom line, there's an actual list which says Washington Post, LA Times, they're not risky. And the Federalist, the Daily Wire, they are risky. And what they would do is they'd meet the social media platforms and they would use the power and force of government. It would never be explicit. They would never go, listen, you've got to follow this blacklist. Otherwise, President Biden will be against you. They just met with them and said, hey, listen, we're from the Department of State. That's a really powerful phrase. And we're thinking that we think these places are more risky. Why don't you look into them? We really wouldn't want to jeopardize our current program that's going on with Facebook or going on with Twitter or going on whatever. So let's just look into those things. And the social media platforms got the message, and therefore they deboosted, they deplatformed. They did whatever they could to kind of obfuscate the alleged risky platforms. So what this lawsuit is designed to do, it's kind of interesting. I thought that the Daily Wire and the Federalist might sue for damages. They're not suing for damages. All they're suing for is stop. They want to stop the federal private sector partnerships as it relates to impinging free speech rights. That's all they want. Now, of course, they want their attorney's fees involved in actually prosecuting this lawsuit in the district court in Texas. And I'm sure it's going to go up to the Fifth Circuit, maybe even up to the Supreme Court at some point in time. But what I thought was kind of nice about this lawsuit is a lot of times it looks like they're going to go for damages. We're suing the administration for $10 billion, all the profits lawsuit are being deboosted. They're not doing that. They're just saying stop, which I love. It's a clean remedy that could be seized upon by other courts to say, listen, we're going to honor a judgment maybe in favor of the Daily Wire because it's really not going to be a lot of money. It's just going to be like, stop, please stop. So
how does this compare? How does this compare to, say, Missouri versus Biden? Because it seems like there's some similarities in there. Because when you say that, when you mention, oh, we're going to the companies, it's almost like, a little, you wouldn't want something bad to happen to your company by working with these bad actors or whatever.
Having worked
state actors.
Having been a federal prosecutor, having been a federal law clerk, having worked for the governor of California back in the 90s, I just know what this power is. I was almost a teenager. I was in my early 20s when I used to walk around and be the chief executive assistant to the governor of California, and magically my lunches would appear. Magically, people would listen to what I'm saying, and I'm like 21 or 22 years old. So the power of the government is absolutely real, and it doesn't have to be explicit. It can be entirely implicit. And I think this is a lawsuit that deserves to get some light of day because it really highlights what is exactly the plan that is going on. This is not building roads. This is not building bridges. This is actually suppressing our individual right to free speech. And they're doing it not explicitly. They're not saying the government says Ian Corzine can't speak. They're just talking to X and they're saying, Ian Corzine is, we don't really like that guy. And that's it.
Right, but there's so many other things involved, like government contracts and different things like that. And that's what I hate about just having, for example, the FBI showing up to your door saying, "Hey, can we talk about some of the people on your platform?"
Exactly.
And then the FBI would say, "We're not telling them they can't have these people on the platform. We're just saying let's talk about the people on the platform."
That's right. It's our free speech.
Yeah. How are these businesses supposed to interpret it? Because if somebody comes to my store, let's say I'm running a business, and they're like, "Hey, let's talk about this Nate guy who was just in here."
Yes.
Well, what about Nate?
These guys have guns.
Oh yeah, they have guns. They have all these things. Like, I'm not saying that what you did is illegal, but we're very concerned about Nate.
Yeah.
And they should be, because it's Nate,
Yeah.
But I don't know. And Nate, I'm surprised. You're going to jump in on the other side and say, "This is a great idea."
I don't.
Nate's like, I'm the one who posted it.
Yeah, I was just like, I wrote it. No, I don't know, because I'm not as clear on the facts, because I hate taking just strong positions either way. In terms of, because there's some instances where the government is investigating. I've been on the side of those investigations, and you want to just ask questions because you don't really have enough to arrest, but you have enough to inquire. So, like in the what you were just saying about going in and saying, "Hey, let's talk. I would like to ask you about Nate." It all depends. We have this evidence saying this. We wanted to see, was he here that day or something like that. So I think there's legitimate reasons that the government can do it, but I think in the context of what Ian's talking about, it seems to me it's wholly. It seems wholly illegitimate, because they seem to be with free speech. And I think what the problem is that who determines what is acceptable for me to hear? And I think it's extremely dangerous if there's some government person back there saying, "You know what, this is what we want you to hear. You can't hear this." I'm more in the position of, I want to hear it all. But if Facebook does that on its own and says, "I don't want," or a Christian website says, "I don't want you to hear the Satanist stuff. I want you to hear this Christian stuff," that's okay, because they're not the government. But when the government now is telling Facebook, this stuff we deem is untruthful, or we feel it's harmful because we think our people are too sensitive to hear this stuff, I think that's oppression, and I think that's way too far. And I'm hoping this lawsuit pulls back that government the ability to do that, because I think that's wrong.
I totally agree with Nate. I really do. It really is the issue of some sort of partnership with the private sector. And then the worst part about it is that it's so implicit. There are not, well, as far as I know, in the lawsuit, there are not emails, there are not texts that says, "Please do not watch or do not allow Nate to succeed on YouTube." There is not. They just happen to say, "Hey, yeah, we saw Nate. We didn't really like it." And that's good enough sometimes.
Yeah. How do I join in?
Anytime you want. Somebody's complaining about my sound.
No, I mean, how do I join in the lawsuit?
Oh,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, call the Daily Wire. Call. Why don't you X post to Ben Shapiro?
It's not
okay.
Ben Shapiro
for all of you in the
listening to
chat.
me, believe it or not.
Is my sound distorting or something like that?
There was a little bit of that, but it
Yeah,
sounds fine to me now.
Sounds fine
But
now.
it's okay now. Yeah.
All right. Okay. I don't know if it's the mic or me or what. Weird.
You
sounds
you have a little bit of like this. I think you have a little bit of the sound of God to you. So like, it's like
Well, that's appropriate.
I like that.
there you go.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's an interesting subtext to this lawsuit where financially, in particular for the Daily Wire, it's actually a very shrewd move on their part, because one of the things that we've seen happen amongst the conservative right is there's this purity test sort of thing which has come along as to like, how hated are you by the government, or how in league or in bed are you with big tech or all these different power brokers. And the Daily Wire in particular has come under intense scrutiny from those who, the further right you are, they've come under intense scrutiny that they fail on a lot of purity tests. You had Susan Wojcicki a couple years back saying that Ben Shapiro will never be deplatformed. You had all these different issues with Crowder and him trying to expose the Daily Wire as being in league with big tech and all these different things. So, and now even with the position on Israel, which seems to their position, which is very, very pro-Israel, it seems to be at odds with certain. I mean, there's a lot of friction going on that issue in general, but it's certainly much more consistent with big government than it is with some I would say newbies to this issue from the right who have sided. And anything that the government says is wrong, so therefore we support Hamas, which is just baffling to me. My point is that there's a lot of reasons that people have looked at the Daily Wire as if maybe they're not as conservative, maybe they're part of the uniparty themselves, and this lawsuit serves to help them distinguish themselves from being part of the uniparty by basically saying, hey, we're being deboosted, we're the ones who we're also being suppressed. And I think that from a strategic perspective, it's a shrewd move on their part to help alienate themselves and show that the government is they're not friends with the government, and I think that helps their branding. So I mean, I'm not saying that it's illicit or that I'm not saying that there's lack of truth to what the lawsuit is. I haven't looked enough at it. I'm simply saying that it's certainly
PR.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's more PR. I'm just saying it is that there's a benefit. There's definitely a PR benefit. I'm not saying that's what the motivation. I'm simply saying there's certainly a PR benefit to it.
My only issue with what you just said is your framing of it as conservative versus liberal, because I think this is a back and forth when it comes to free speech. If we go back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, even in the 80s, right? The people who were canceling people were the conservatives. They were canceling. Women couldn't kiss on TV, and this, and you had these conservative values, and you were canceled if you weren't Christian conservative enough to be put on TV and stuff. Now it happens to be flipped the totally opposite way, because it just happens to be now the people who are canceling are the liberals who are canceling the conservatives. And I think Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire, even though nobody's a perfect vessel, but they have some egg on their face, because when this Israel thing came up, it was all free speech. Then all of a sudden they're pro-Israel, and that free speech, he was advocating that people lose their jobs and be banned from Twitter for saying things that were negative against Israel.
Good. We're gonna spin on that one, because I was hoping we could get in on the presidents of the university situation in front of Congress, and no. I think this is we can circle back, but we've got to segue into that, because a lot of people are trying to lay into the free speech absolutists versus that. That one I think is very interesting, because you have these presidents of universities, and the questions asked of them was, is it against your code of conduct which, by the way, is not a First Amendment thing. It is a code of conduct of the university. Mm-hmm. And I think it is a question of consistency in their messaging. We all know that if instead of saying, do you count it if people say that genocide is okay, essentially is what they're putting out, replacing the word Jews with the word blacks and replacing genocide with, say, the L word that happened in the South, would that be allowed at those universities? And I think the answer we would all say is no, it would not. Or if you said LGBT, replace the word Jews with LGBT, replace it with people who are overweight or heavy, replace it with Muslims, all are unacceptable. But when it comes to Jews, well, there's some nuance there. There's some context. No, I think that is the complaint, and it is a legitimate complaint. Now, if it was opened up and said, no, you know what? We're going to go like Skokie versus Illinois or whatever the case was, then, okay, fair enough. If it is free speech for all and we're saying the darkest, deepest, crappiest things about everybody, fair enough. But when you're saying, sorry, these are the snowflake groups and you can't say anything about them, but you can pick on that group because, well, truthfully, it appears to me, this is my opinion, that the presidents aren't as worried or didn't seem as worried about that because, well, they kind of agreed. So what are your thoughts on that? Because I do think it comes into...
Is it that they agreed or they... Sorry, is it that they agreed or they were scared to confront this? Because this really seems more of the scarecrow is afraid to confront the fire he started.
I don't really care. I don't care the reason. It's the result.
Well, no, I understand that. I'm just saying, like you saw it in the hearing, they had sheer terror on their face, thinking, oh my God, I'm going to get home and get they might throw a brick at me, or, oh my God, the donors are going to leave, and the donors are leaving instead. I think this is, but yeah, we've seen this. Like there's I think it's Ben Shapiro, but I hate to use him as an example. But there have been conservatives who's showing up on campuses and they're like, "Oh, the place, you're not allowed to be here anymore. Sorry," or "You need like a $300,000 insurance policy," or "You need the security. You need to do this and that." Yeah, this is an issue of that unequal application is really becoming very apparent because, I hate that, the idea you could run around, let's say Richard Spencer showed up and they, all the Nazis at Charlottesville showed up at a college campus. They'd be like, no, you're not allowed to be here. They're literally saying the same thing as these groups, yet apparently now it's okay.
Right. That's a great comparison. Compare Charlottesville with Hamas, and let's see which one's worse.
Well, but because I think the argument, because there have been, the left has been getting punished because they're saying the same thing now too. Free speech. There are, and I think there are multiple examples because right now, one of the biggest issues on campus is them saying Israel's committing genocide against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. And some of them are being punished for saying that. And they're saying, well, it's okay for us to say Hamas did this, but it's not okay for us to say Israel did this. And that's another comparison that they're saying. And some of the people are being punished for that thing. I think Rikita Taliba, some other people have been punished for just saying certain things that people just don't like. Now, I agree 100% that there is a cruel double standard when it comes to Israel. When October, I forgot the date, when October 7th happened, when October 7th happened, I expected more sympathy for Israel, but these people were saying they essentially deserved it, which I think is disgusting. But then I think the college presidents are put in a pickle because now, like you guys are saying, you can't say this against all these other groups, but now you have a minority group who've been attacked and you're allowing people to say these things. So now I think they have egg on their face, but that still doesn't, I still don't think that confronts the point that's being made about Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire, because they have been advocating that people lose their jobs, be fired, and all this stuff because they don't like the fact that these people say, okay, Hamas did this, but we still don't like Israel because we believe they're committing genocide.
Okay, so
I think that's the free speech issue that people are bringing when they talk about the Daily Wire. And I think that's why the Daily Wire is doing this, because they want to kind of reset everything and say, okay, yes.
Well, hold on. In fairness, Nate, though, because you can say that about Ben Shapiro, and you can say, okay, he's an absolute hypocrite. But Daily Wire also has Candace Owens, who's talking the exact opposite in the same organization. So, are you going to attack the Daily Wire, or are you going to attack Ben Shapiro? Because I don't think you're quite being fair when the same organization has two
an employee
points.
versus an employee versus.
I don't care.
Ben Shapiro's like one of the people who owns the Daily
it doesn't
Wire,
matter.
Right?
That doesn't matter. Own a chunk of the business.
Well,
Candace Owens doesn't own.
No, hold on.
I guess
Daily Wire.
That's kind of bullshit because Ben is not a controlling partner. If he was and he was firing Candace Owens, that'd be one thing. But notice she's not fired. She's still there. She's speaking away and she's hanging out with Tucker.
She can speak away and she can do all that, but she's not more important to the Daily Wire than Ben Shapiro. Let's just
it doesn't matter.
Let's not. And we're talking about an employee versus a co-owner. So we can make it seem like they're the same, but they're not the same when it comes to that. You can make the argument Ben Shapiro speaks for the Daily Wire. I'm not saying he is, but you could make the argument. Just like when Elon speaks, he doesn't speak as Twitter, but people associate that as Twitter because he's the guy.
Okay, but you're tap dancing around the issue. The fact is that they both are public faces of the same organizations. They're both giving alternate opinions, and they're both coming out. And I don't think you're being completely fair to the organization because they are allowing alternate opinions. I don't know every single person on their staff or whatever, but if they were freezing her out or shutting out Candace Owens, then absolutely. But they do have literally a war within the Daily Wire, and it is leaked out into the public. Now, I'm not a huge Daily Wire fan. They have they have their problems, but let's be honest about it. It's not like they're saying, "Oh, we're 100% fire everybody," blah blah blah, and they're not saying we believe in that. Ben Shapiro believes in that, and I think there is a difference.
I was going to say, I think, and I agree there might be some issues there, but when it's coming to the campus issues, I think we can kind of skip even over the Daily Wire part because, like, we saw footage of like the Jewish students stuck in the library and people out there pounding on doors, screaming about genocide in Israel and for the rivers to the sea.
Actual harassment. People afraid to walk.
5+3. Like, yes, and like I think there was some footage of. At MIT, at I think the Hillel, and that's a college level Jewish organizations, a guy was out there banging on the window and then taking a leak on the window repeatedly. Like it's not happening everywhere, and I'm not saying there's pogroms on campuses all over the country, but to act like this is being like, some like, if I was on that campus doing that wouldn't have been tolerated for 200ths of a second.
Well, how would you feel as a Jewish student there? I mean, that actually is scary.
I'd be carrying a strap if I was.
It is scary. I would be afraid to go that much. Yeah.
But why do you think? And this always. Why do you think when it comes to the Jewish people, why do you think there's such this like, because they're minorities just like everyone else, right? But when it comes to the Jewish people, I would suspect that campuses would be more sympathetic to their cause because they're just like blacks and all the other minority groups. But it seems like they take them out from being a minority group and put them treat them essentially as white people. That's
exactly why.
So it's a weird little thing.
Well, it's this is the kind of the thing people are realizing. Like, wow, the hard left is really anti-Semitic, and yes, the communists and the Marxists don't like Jews. Like, it's you get to the hard ends of both sides, they don't like the Jews.
Thank you. That's a good point. Ron Coleman actually brought this point up, saying all those students are not Israelis. Those students are Jewish, and there is a difference. They are being yelled at, screamed at, harassed, not because they're Israeli, but because of another reason. And that is a giant problem.
Which exposes the entire anti-Zionist thing. It exposes it because the link is so obvious to all these sheep who are marching behind these crazies that to claim that this thin veneer, the only positive that's come out of this is it's exposed that this entire anti-Zionist movement is really just anti-Jew. And they can claim and pretend no, we're fine with Jews. It's just all about we don't like Israel. Well, then why the hell are you assuming that every Israeli is pro-Israel? You assume or supports the Israeli government. Would you assume every American supports the American government and is proud of the actions that government is taking? Why would you march on a Hillel in some campus when a lot of Jews are very against the state of Israel?
Very, yeah.
So why would you assume that Jews in a Hillel are part, are someone who should be targeted rather than that they're marching alongside with you? It's because this entire thing is kind of absurd. I want to just point something out to you when you talk about who should be canceled. I just want you to picture someone in December of 2001 saying America deserved it. Because that's what these people who are now coming forward saying Israel deserved it. It's the exact same thing. And ask yourself, if someone says, I don't want to have someone like that working for me, would you say that that's cancel culture? Or would you say, no, I just, that you're kind of gross? And the same way if the person used the N-word and you say, you know what, I don't want someone who uses the N-word around me. So too, it's like someone who's saying, Israel deserved to have its civilians burnt and graped, that all of a sudden that someone who says, I don't want to be around that is now part of cancel culture. I don't think that's really, I don't consider that really cancel culture. I think someone who's calling for it, I can understand. I understand how this line gets very murky, and I get it, and I'm very cognizant of the fact that because I'm Jewish, that I'm always afraid that I'm not going to be looking at it fairly, or at the very least, I'm confident that a certain percentage of people out there will assume that I'm not looking at it fairly because of a natural bias that I would have. And I understand, and that's why I try to bend over backwards, looking at this from other sides, or inserting different races in it, so I can try and approach this in a healthy sort of way. And I'll tell you, you talk about what's allowed on campuses and what's not allowed on campuses. I've spent like roughly eight hours this week on one show after another, fixating on trying to understand what would make something different with someone screaming genocide. Is this cancel culture? Is this free speech? What makes something free speech? Why do we have free speech? What is the motivation for having free speech? And think about what the motivation is for why it is that we're all so strongly in favor of free speech and the benefits that come from supporting free speech. And if you break down what the benefits of free speech are, what the objectives as to why we have free speech, what you tend to come down to is it's to share ideas so that we can learn truth. It's so you can petition your government. It's also that it's a part of who we are as people, that we're our ability to express ourselves. And for the most of the primary objectives behind free speech, when you look at someone who's stoking up a crowd, which this is what it is, it's really, I mean, they're not trying to teach anyone anything. When you're marching on some restaurant in Philadelphia, and you're not trying to educate people or discuss truth. It's a matter of, we're bringing a mob here to these people that we don't like. So now you have to reassess, what is the objectives of free speech? Which objectives of free speech are being met here? That's a positive. Are people learning more about it, or are people learning more about the issue? There's no discussion. There's no dialogue. It's basically like the mob from Beauty and the Beast going after what they perceive to be the beast. I mean, it's like they got the pitchforks and everything.
I'm sorry, Joe. I gotta fundamentally disagree. I think free speech is just like when it happened in the Midwest, when you had the neo-Nazis say, we're going to march and say we hate the Jews and we want the eradication of Israel, right? They were marching. And who represented them? It was
ACLU.
It was not only ACLU, it was also Dershowitz.
Yes.
Right. And they were going out there saying the same thing they're saying now. And the fundamental thing about that case wasn't, because you're talking about the ends, right? What's the ends? It's a means test. So free speech doesn't protect what I like. It protects the speech we don't like.
Oh,
and that's why Dershowitz went out there and defended them.
Nate, here's your mistake though. Okay? Because the other element we need to look at is who's clamping down on the free speech. And I think that when it comes, and that's why when you're talking about free speech that's being clamped by the government, I think that we should be tying the hands of the government much more than we should be tying anyone else's hands for a few reasons. Part of the primary reason for free speech is that people can protest against the government and influence change in the government. B, government is the only entity in the country which has a license to engage in violence. And the danger of tyranny from a government is far more overarching, and far more threatening than it is from any private individual or entity, even because government has that license. So when it comes to government exerting down on free speech, I think that they should almost never be allowed to do it unless we reach that Brandenburg standard. But that's because I don't ever want to see government clamping on free speech unless it's like as a last resort, because there's such a dangerous element. But if that clamping down on free speech is not being exerted by government, in that case, I think that then it's a fairer time to start looking at, well, what objectives of free speech? Is a college promoting or not promoting free speech? Well, I mean, now it's the college which is exerting that force. And unless you want to say that colleges are being controlled by government, which is possible that they are, and that's the strongest undercut to this argument.
Bring it back to this case.
Exactly. So if you want to say that the reason I don't want colleges to do it is because ultimately they are puppet strings of government, and like I said, that's a fair claim. In that case, we can come to your argument and say, well, this is like Skokie all over again. But if you look at them as a private entity and you believe that they're acting as a private entity, or as a bunch of scared cowards who are scared of their own students, and that's why they're having this internal struggle, in that case, I don't think we need to worry about Penn State, exerting too much control over it. And the other issue with respect to these colleges specifically is, as what came up in the hearing, is that they have been funded to the tune of that Harvard got $1.5 billion over the last 3 years from various entities in the Middle East to promote anti-Zionist hate, which we see is not simply anti-Zionist hate. They're the ones who are teaching the students to think this way. So they basically, what these colleges were doing is they spent years and years basically saying Israel's an apartheid state, Israel's a terrible place, Israel's racist against all these different Arabs. They're looking to kill and suppress and harm as many Arabs as possible. And now when these students are lashing out, what are they saying? They're saying, oh, well, we can't do anything because it's free speech. It's free speech. The only reason they're thinking this way is because you've been infecting their minds with this poison. So now when they're going out there, it's almost like they're like the analogy I gave is it's like someone who produces fentanyl and then gives it out to a massive distributor, and when that distributor starts giving out and like basically to the public, they say, well, I can't do anything. Capitalism, they own the fentanyl, it's theirs, I can't do anything about it. It's like, dude, you're the one who created this entire mess in the first place, and now you're sitting there saying that, well, because of fundamental perspectives about fundamental philosophies of American culture, that now you can't do anything. That's a freaking joke, especially when you never want to embrace it any other time. The only time you ever want to embrace it is here and now today. But anytime until now that you saw it, you were just basically like, oh, well, we're allowed to cancel anyone who says anything against LGBT. We're allowed to cancel.
That's the issue, is the selective enforcement of what is going on. Everything else, but I just
want to make it very clear. The principle of free speech, we all agree. They can say these things, right? But the issue is the selective enforcement of how they distribute it. If you say it against a black person, it's not tolerated, you're kicked off. You say it against now Jewish people, now we're going to let it go and we're going to pretend it's free speech. That, I think, is the issue.
Well, Nate, I think there's selective enforcement, but it's also, there are actual situations where, like I said, students are stuck in buildings and
actual threats, yes.
That's like rubber bullets and tear gas time.
Yeah.
And that's only going to escalate. And I'm surprised that somebody hasn't gotten like Donnybrook really bad on a campus somewhere at this point, because I mean, things like this only tend to escalate.
That's a good question. Now, I think that when you are targeting specific student or students and threatening them directly, or where they can visibly feel threatened or logically feel threatened, we are no longer in speech. We're no longer in speech land, and we are in threatening actions, assaulting. And if they are genuinely terrified, and honestly, I'm just trying to put myself in their place. If somebody said, oh, there are people should get on a diet to do better for their health. That's not a direct targeted thing. But if I'm walking around and they're saying, hey, fat boy, get your fat ass over there. What are you doing? Now, I would feel personally targeted and threatened. And I don't know. We start to move away, I think, from the free speech. Let's take that Charlottesville and Skokie example. They're marching saying they, right? I mean, Charlottesville is a more recent example.
Jews
will
not replace us.
Jews will not replace us. Jews will not replace us. They said that.
Israel should be gone, that type of thing.
Okay, that's bad, but they're not lined up against the Jewish fraternity, throwing things at their window, targeting the people going in and out. Now we've gone to another level, and that I think is a good question.
Well, that's not. But I think that's unfair because that's not all. There have been protests where they've been like, oh, this. And you could point out specific examples on each side, right? That they did this, but generally, what we're told, and this is what I was making the point of, is that you have these massive protests on campuses against Israel, and this I align to with what happened in the Midwest. But now, if you're talking about specific examples of people being, yes, of course, that happens on both sides. I agree with that. That's not free speech. But if we're talking about the free speech concept, I think then we can't say them saying we hate Israel. Israel is bad. I think they're saying it is just as protected as those neo-Nazis saying it.
I also don't agree with the students who say wipe out Gaza. I mean, there is the alternate, and there are video examples saying, like showing pictures of Gaza should be a desert land, and that's wrong too.
I think it's wrong, but
I agree with you that's wrong. That's like Charlottesville, and I agree with everything you just said. And I'll tell you something: as a Jew who watched both those videos, when I saw the whole Jews shall not replace us with the tiki torches, I'll tell you right now, I felt a cold chill. When I saw these people marching on that Israeli restaurant in Philadelphia, I told my wife that I want her to get a gun. It's a different level. You're right, Eric. It's a completely different level because I'm like, it's not simply people out in the world basically expressing themselves and chanting and stoking themselves up where they are at a distance from causing harm. These are people marching up to the door and basically and fortunately no one got physically harmed in that particular incident.
Yeah,
but you're right when you're saying Sean, that these things only escalate, and that's a whole different level. That is a whole different thing where I was like it's not a matter of, I just want to have a gun. I want my wife to have a gun. I want my kids who are old enough to have guns. And this is from Jews in the Northeast are traditionally terrified of guns, but I'm like but I'm telling you right now, this is a whole different circumstance. It's not comparable, and that's why it's funny that after all of the screaming for years and years that Trump didn't condemn nearly enough the whole Charlottesville rally, and that he didn't condemn it nearly enough, and these freaking college presidents on their own stinking campus are basically allowing pretty much the same conduct, and especially 10 seconds after we're seeing what's happening in restaurants and what's happening in their own Hillel houses, and they're basically sitting there silent. You are full of crap. Everything you said for the last 4 years about how terrible Trump is, or how he's racist, or how he's okay, you're such empty suits. You're hot garbage that you have the audacity to stand behind that position while you stoke this flame, and now you're sitting here saying, "Oh, we can't do anything." They're very fine people marching in these rallies on campus. Very, very fine people.
They're good boys. They've done nothing wrong.
They're good people.
This is where and these college presidents, all they had to say was, "We will not tolerate unlawful behavior."
Yes,
that's all they had to say. But no, they had to say, well, I mean, it's not okay. I mean, it's okay. I mean, it's okay if you don't like.
Depends on the context.
It's just easy enough to say. It's just easy enough to say we do not tolerate free speech is free speech, but we will not tolerate unlawful behavior.
But I feel like I would be remiss to not say, I think this thing it changes so quickly in such a short amount of time. Because I could bring up Kanye, I could bring up Kyrie Irving, It's not like it's you do have a point in time where you couldn't say certain things about Jewish people, or you would lose your job. You would be, that type of thing happened, right?
Heck, not too long ago. The ADL stuff,
not too long ago. And I also think the ADL is part of the problem because everything everything is anti-Semitic. Oh, this guy said this. It's anti-Semitic, and that's now made it so. Right now, it's like it's actually giving cover to the real anti-Semites because they say everything is anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
So we've gotten to the point because like this guy Kyrie sharing that video. They called him an anti-Semitic and suspended him for 2 weeks from his $1 million job. And they were like, that's anti-Semitic. But now you have this stuff that's really anti-Semitic, and people are like, come on, this
it's crying wolf syndrome.
It's everything. Yeah.
So I call him Jonathan Goebbels. I thought that's who I call him because Jonathan Greenblatt is the worst. The head of the ADL is the worst possible person, and he's created much more anti-Semitism than he could ever possibly eradicate in 100 lifetimes.
But I also think without talking about that, it's just like with the race grifters. I think he's the anti-Semite grifter. It's just like without understanding this in that context, now it's going to be harder for them to say, well, is it anti-Semitic because that type of thing. And I think
you're right.
Unfortunately, you're confronted with that.
It's a great analogy to the race grifters. It's perfect. He is a race grifter. He is.
Yeah, no. I mean, well, and the sad thing is, just like the race grifters, as you put it, Nate, if he didn't have a controversy, he wouldn't have a job. And these people, in my opinion, they can't say there's any improvement. There always has to be a problem. If they solve their problem, they've got to find more. There's an old Lenny Bruce skit. I didn't realize it was called "Thank You, Mask Man," and it was a spin-off of the Lone Ranger. That he had stopped all the crime and all that, so he had to go start problems. So he had work.
Let me give you an example of something that's going on right now as we speak. Somebody who's getting canceled right now and has to fight it. Elon freaking Musk in that stupid tweet. Nobody thought that was anti-Semitic, but guess what? They're all trying to cancel him for that anti-Semitic tweet, which wasn't anti-Semitic at all.
No, it was clunky. It was clunky. He could have given more context to it. That's the best way I can.
Right?
No, I'm just saying it was,
even though it's clunky, it was clunky.
But it was clunky enough that people could inject that view into it. All I'm saying is but that's where we have to be careful what we put out, because he did leave enough room in there for people to manipulate it and have it hard to argue with. And I know because I have Mark as my show partner, and Mark was kind of against it. So it's a weird
is the problem. Thing. It's to each his own, right? What's racist to me may not be racist to you. As soon as you say, well, it can be read in certain, this is what free speech is meant to protect. We don't give a damn how you feel about it unless it's something overt. If you can say it's free, it's free. And I think that's the issue right now. As soon as somebody can interpret it, then you shouldn't be able to, because you might take it one way, somebody else, but that's why you can't sue for being racist for defamation, because it's so subjective.
Also, I think it's worth noting that the perception of what race is differs from culture to culture and country to country. What classifies as white, what classifies as black, and all the rest of it is not the same concept. So there's some sort of American arrogance from the left-wing college people that thinks, well, our perception of race is the only way that race can be perceived. That is definitely not true if you have any knowledge of the world.
I agree.
For example, the Japanese and Chinese have some issues with each other, so there's that.
Oh yeah, Japanese are known, and are you saying?
Whoa,
your audio's done.
My audio's done.
It went really bad for about 5 seconds.
It's good now.
Oh, sorry. The Japanese are a very, I'll just say, purist culture. That's the best way I can put it. They're very, very nationalistic. I think that would be the right term. They're extremely nationalistic. They don't have a whole lot of immigration into their country. They don't support it very much. I think that would be a fair way of saying it.
One of the things I was just going to say real quick was just to distinguish all the discussion. One of the things I think we get caught up on is good and bad speech. Hypocrisy is allowed under the First Amendment. So you can, at the same time, I can say I don't like Nate when I really do like Nate, but I could say that.
I heard you, but too late.
I can also be punished for being controversial and saying something. I love Nate. You don't have to, just because
Did you say I love Nate?
Nate.
Oh,
Nate.
I wasn't sure if it was the meat thing or
go. No, I guess what I'm trying to say is that we can argue back and forth about what's good and what's bad, but that's what the Constitution's about. It's messy. Matter of fact, if it's not messy, then I know something's wrong. And when you look at something like the lawsuit we discussed early on, that's an attempt by the government to make it not messy. You can do this. This is risky. This is not risky. So while I appreciate the dialogue as we go around and say, this is wrong. I can't believe this changed. It used to be this way. They used to say this and these. Yeah, that's exactly right. And let's continue to do that. Let's continue to say these people are wrong. These people are right. And then be able to change your mind and say, actually, I was wrong. So I really want to make sure we understand that, us lawyers, we see that the speech is a much simpler, I think, a mechanism for public expression and like Joe was saying, allowing us to express ourselves as people. So what we want to do is not to cut any of that speech, to fight good words with bad words, or vice versa, to cut bad speech with good speech. So that's kind of really my position on this stuff. So a lot of this stuff goes over my head. I'm like, oh, okay. Yes, there is a line between action or omission and speech, right? I mean, obviously, if you're targeting someone, if you're harassing someone, you're assaulting someone, that is a crime. That is a civil wrong, and that can be remedied. But you certainly, as wrong as you may be, can say you like, bad people out there. I don't want to use any of these terms and get the
thank you.
Because you're
right. Free speech is supposed to be. It is messy.
I did that last time. I'm sorry about
even that. A generalized call for race X or religion X should be wiped off the face of the earth is protected speech in the United States.
It is.
That's not incitement. It's not specific enough to refer
but if you
to
do
any
it to
specific
somebody's
person.
face, hold on. If you do it to somebody's face of that race as they're walking in their normal course of life, that's where I think it starts to get a little murky there, because I'm walking to class and you say that I should not exist. I can possibly feel threatened, Kurt. And so, and again, I don't know the limitations. I'm not the lawyer, but I think that's where we're getting.
It's not about how you feel.
Yeah, it's not about how you feel.
Yeah,
because my freedom of speech does not depend on the speaker, or does not depend on who the listener is.
Yeah,
right. If I have the freedom of speech to say it to anybody, I have the freedom of speech to say it to everybody. So that's sort of how that works. So the United States doesn't have any concept of hate speech, and I think we're better for it.
So hold on. So then, when these universities, so we're going to go right back again, when they're saying, okay, you just did that to somebody who's black, like Nate, you're out. You're out. You didn't even do it outside. You're just out. Because why? Because they feel threatened, and we're not going to have them feel threatened. Now, a lot of things that they feel threatened about, different groups, LGBT, whatever, all these different things, a lot of us, me included, are saying, oh, give me a break. Just saying blah, blah, blah doesn't mean that. But when you are actively shouting at people directly, again, when does it become speech? When does speech become an actual threat?
Well, first of all,
perception, I think, is very much a part of it. Let's take the New Mexico law. Oh, hold on. Let's take the New Mexico law that they had to change because Alec Baldwin had the additional charges put on, and then it got taken away. The reason why it was taken away is because
the legislature fucked up.
Well, why did they fuck up? Because the law changed. They put a law in effect that came in later. The original version of the law said if somebody had to feel threatened for that to actually be wielding a gun. And because Helena Hutchins did not feel threatened because of circumstances, they could not apply that law. So I'm just saying that there seems to be circumstances if somebody
but in that situation, the feeling of threat is tied to the act, right? The display of the firearm. Or display of the weapon, right? Yes. So we're distinguishing someone displaying a weapon in a situation where you wouldn't feel threatened, like, for example, on a play, and a situation where you would feel threatened, for example, a mugging. So the threat is relating to the action. Now, when it comes to universities, we of course have to distinguish between private and public universities. Private universities are not bound by the Constitution. They're only bound by their own rules. So you'd have to look to the specific rule of the university. As relates to public colleges, if they're trying to take action against students for lawful free speech, they can sue and they'd win. And there's certainly any number of examples through the history of exactly that happening. So, go get it, guys.
And there's more issues there too. I mean, even if they're private, there's the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibits discrimination. So there are lots of legal issues that go with it. But I think if you're talking, to Eric's point, what is the line? It's the threat of imminent physical harm. And if that occurs, that is an assault. And that is a crime, and that could be also compensable.
Yeah, exactly. It's assault. That's definitionally assault. Welcome to Brandenburg.
I am going to get you right there. Yes, you or if I say I hate all the blanks, and you happen to be a blank, that's not enough. It's got to be. I got to be threatening you directly.
Yeah, I was listening to congressional hearings, and I think it was one of the Democrats questioning one of the colleges who said, "What you're saying is that someone can openly threaten, Jewish people and say that it's not, and that's protected speech. That can't possibly be the rule in America." And I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's the rule in America. With all due respect, Congressman or Congresswoman, as the case was in that situation. So yeah.
Well, and I didn't see the whole conference. Somebody said that they did ask later, because again, the question of the college university presidents is very quickly replace Jews with blacks and replace genocide with the L word. And I'm not saying that out loud, but it rhymes with wrenching.
Right.
And
I think that's exactly right. I think that is exactly right, because you need to have a consistent standard throughout. Yeah. That's exactly what we do in freedom of speech. So if you pose that question to me, I'd be like, sounds okay to me legally, because it doesn't make any difference. They're trying to splice the difference, and that's what it doesn't really make sense.
And Ian just made that point about the hypocrisy in the First Amendment, right? You can be apocryphal, but the state can't.
Now, of course, for the record, just because I say it's protected legally would in no way obligate me to like it. And of course, I would use my freedom of speech to say you're a jackass.
Absolutely. Sure. And I love that.
Speech can speech. Hey, one thing I wanted to ask you guys about, I don't know if you guys have seen any of this this case going down in Georgia.
Oh, yeah, Young Thug. I want you to talk all about it.
Oh, my God. It's insane. So a juror's got arrested and had to do 3 days in jail. A bailiff has got arrested. And a couple of attorneys have got arrested. It's like it's the whole thing is hyper insane.
All right, so what's going on? Come on now, you can't just say, "Look, all these people arrested." Now
that was in the
you spill out the story. Don't bury. What happened?
All right. So for those of you know, Young Thug, he's a award-winning rapper. He's supposed to be a head of this street gang, Blood Street gang in Atlanta. So this is one of the first tests for Fani Willis in a RICO statute. So Georgia, unfortunately, expanded its RICO statute to include a ton-load of crimes that the federal government doesn't allow. So usually the federal government generally does like murder and all that stuff. So Georgia said we're gonna extend it to criminal street gangs. So we want things like fraud, more or less any felony can be caught up under a RICO statute.
I think there's 3 major differences between the federal statute. The federal statute requires that the crimes be connected and related, and the Georgia version doesn't. They also require that a RICO involve a conspiracy of people, and Georgia's like, how about one? That sounds good to us.
Yeah.
And the third one was just the scope of what counts for RICO. I mean, the federal law is already pretty broad. I think it's like 40 something things count for RICO and feds, but Georgia's like, how about like 80 things? So Georgia's version is pretty extensive.
It's pretty broad. So this is the first test under that revised statute. Now it's interesting because at first they called the new Georgia law essentially racist because they wanted to go after these street gangs, but now it's not racist anymore. Now it's a good law because we're going after the evil orange man. So now they got the good law. So in this test, the street gang. So most of them a lot of them have already flipped anyway. So now they got the main guy who happens to be Young Thug. Now in this case, this is pretrial stuff. So pretrial, the judge is trying to figure everything out, and Young Thug. Now the big issue with this case, which you'll hear about, is the use of lyrics. Now generally, the court there's a rule against propensity in court. I can't say that you're acting in conformity with something. So, for instance, if you've committed a crime of armed robbery in the past, and I'm charging you with committing an armed robbery now, unless those crimes are exactly the same, or there's something I can show, like maybe you use ketchup in that one to rob the person using ketchup now, you can't say the person's acting in conformity as they did before. You have to kind of prove this case on its own merit. So that's propensity evidence. So in this case, they're using the lyrics because the lyrics are very descriptive of what actually happened. Like, I shot the guy at 3:00 on a Friday. His name was James, and I used a 38. And then it's like, oh, the guy was shot at 3:00 on a Friday. His name is James, and he used a 38. Bingo.
Well,
so
that happened.
So they're saying that those lyrics are essentially confessions of crime. So now the one side is saying, well, number one is racist because they're picking on black people whose rap lyrics, and number two is that they want to pass a law saying you can't use rap lyrics or any of these type of artistic expressions as evidence in these crimes. But the counter to that is, and they're saying because it's a free speech issue. But the counter to that is, all confessions are free speech. Matter of fact, it's the highest degree of free speech because the government cannot compel you to incriminate yourself. So every confession, by definition, is essentially free speech. You have to do it freely. You have to freely exercise free speech to do it.
Can we step back in? I'm confused about this because let's take out the lyrics aspect of it. Let's just say that I wrote a short story, or let's say somebody, a woman writes a short story on how to kill her husband, and her husband winds up dead with the exact procedure that was written out in the short story. And it has, and I think that because
it's a Dutch writer, it's a Dutch crime writer. His wife disappeared, and a year after her disappearance, he wrote a book, 7 Ways to Kill Your Wife. And then the cops read the book and was like, "Oh, he actually killed his wife this way," and they found her and everything. It was like crazy. So what actually happened.
So is it artistic expression, or is that a confession? Well, and I think it's a legit question.
That was
I think, but it's some of the issues though with the rap lyrics. It's not always saying exactly how it goes down, but it's like so and so's going to get God, or you're going to get what's coming to you, and there's a lot of it's a lot of allusions to things, and there's like they're suggesting things, not necessarily saying I'm going to go smoke them in front of the McDonald's. It's just like a lot of the rap lyrics, they're talking crap to each other, and that's where it's because some of the Young Thug lyrics are not clear.
Yeah, some of them aren't clear. Yes,
and I will say though, Nate, this case is, this is like a preview of what's going to happen in the Trump case, because we've already got it to the point where the state already screwed up like right out the door on their opening arguments. That's not like the end of the world, but that's just a prelude because this is supposed to be like one of their A teams. They have like the detectives get up there like, oh, well, is that guy in the room? He's like, I thought I saw him in the room here, but like trying to ID people that weren't in the courtroom. There's like it has turned into an absolute disaster, as far as how they've been presenting this case. So
I like the fact that now one of the crazy things that happened is that the judge. So there was a defense attorney who came late, like 2 or 3 days. Yeah. So the judge forced him to buy lunch for everybody because everybody was late to lunch from a strip club, from a nearby strip club. So he does that, and then the judge says either he has a choice: he can spend 20 days in jail, or write a 17-page paper good enough to be published in a journal, in a law review journal. And if that doesn't happen, he spends 20 days in jail. So this case is like insane.
There's been a lot of attorney misconduct.
Okay, well, that's some judicial misconduct.
No, because well, the judge has the right to sanction you. And if I'm late for court a lot, he could say, if I'm the judge, I could say, Mr. Hunley, you've been showing up late to court. I hereby hold you in contempt. I'm going to fine you like $500 or whatever amount. So,
but it starts to get out of hand. Like, but had to buy everybody lunch from a nearby strip club. Now, let's say that the person, their faith is against that kind of activity at the strip club. Just as an example. Now, do we not have a collision here? And I'm being serious. You are forcibly
Well, I think
telling somebody no, this is relevant, and also there should be some degree of limitations. Like, okay, so, you know what, you're late, Sean. You really pissed me off. So I'm fining you $10,000.
Well, that would be that would be an abuse of his power.
So what's the abuse and what's real? Hey, he's got rights. He's a judge.
Sure. No, I understand, but I'm just saying, with that issue about like, I can't do that, or my religious piety, like. And if the judge were to cause you problems, okay, fine, hook me. And then the Court of Appeals is going to be like, no, you can't do that. Saying I'll buy it somewhere else, or I'm willing to spend that money. That was more of the issue is instead of me just fining you money, I'm going to do something you tend to remember. And one of the jurors was screwing around in trial, I think filming things.
And she got 3 days.
I want you to write me a 10-page essay, or you can go to jail. The judge, the courts, because it could just say, fine, everybody goes to jail. That doesn't do anything for people.
This seems like a TV show, for God's sake.
Well, it is.
This judge seems like a performer.
Well, it is.
Well, there's some of that, but there's a lot of judges who will come up with creative punishments for people.
Yeah, because don't forget, they are giving them the choice. You can do X or you can do Y, right? If you want to do Y, you can do Y. You know, and generally, like even with this paper thing, he said you could do the 20 days in jail. You don't have to do the paper. And the guy's like, well, I'll pay the $1,000 fine. He said, no, I didn't offer you the fine. 20 days in jail, or write me a 17-page paper. He chose to write the paper. You know?
Yeah.
Chat GPT, write me a no.
Yeah. Well, yes.
No, I'm not that I would ever advise anybody to do that. It's just that
that's the but no, that's the thing there. I mean, courts have a lot of leeway in that when they deal with contempt issues. You know, some courts, you know, it's like if for example, it's just that's how it goes. But this judge, the jury selection in Young Thug's case, took 7 months. That's how long it took. They had tons of problems, and by the time
this judge should be removed. I mean, for God's sake, no. There gets to be a certain point here where it's like, what kind of courtroom are you running? You're doing these little bullshit stunts. And let's do this. It takes you 7 months to get a jury. What are you running? Are you incompetent?
No, Eric. No. That's because there's 6 separate co-defendants.
Yeah.
There's the possibility of like 500 witnesses being called. This case is a massive clunking heap of crap.
Well, maybe the whole law is.
Well, that's the issue because in Georgia, basically 3 people committing a crime is RICO, and it doesn't matter that there was actual RICO. But that's the thing, like and for Young Thug, there were 27 people initially indicted. Now there's 6 guys in a courtroom. There's 6 separate objections. There's 6 separate openings. There's 6 of everything that's going on. That's the reason why you've gone through so many, because everybody gets so many preparatories. There's we're trying to screen out people, and this is a massive case. It took that long because the state induced this.
Is there really a strong case against this guy, or is it they don't have much of a case, so they're throwing all this noise against it? Because I question it. It's like, look, if this guy, you've got a case and he killed somebody who's a murderer or whatever, just prosecute the son of a bitch. All this other stuff seems like noise.
Well, the case, they flipped everybody. So the case is as strong as it's going to get.
Yes.
I think they got him for RICO dead to rights. Even though they have this, but I think the RICO charges are going. He's going.
And ultimately, the Young Slime Life gang. That's what these guys are. There was a murder back in 2015, and they think Young Thug authorized it or let it to happen. He rented a car that they used to go do it, which, you know what? There's an easier way to do this. Conspiracy to commit murder, bam, done, over.
Okay.
But this is the issue, though. Prosecutors have the ability to charge as they see fit, and this is what happens when you get somebody like Fannie Willis, who is a bit of a tard. And I hate to say it like that, but they thought this was a good idea. Like, we're going to basically build a car as we're driving. We're going to work on the engine while we're driving down the road. And this is what happens. It turns into a complete mess. 8 months of jury selection. They've burned through, at this point now, the long crime camera actually looked at some of the jurors accidentally. And the judge has, and this is the part where I'm actually very pissed off at this judge. He didn't tell the jurors about that. They don't know that they've been doxxed. Ooh. And the idea, like, once people find out, and another time somebody took a picture in the past week or so, and one of the jurors heard about it and saw it on social media, and the judge is mad, like, well, you saw this. It's like, yeah, oh, you know what? Yes, my safety might be in jeopardy in a gang trial. Yes, how dare I know about that? But he's to the point where he can't tell the jurors, hey, look, if you feel uncomfortable, I'm refusing to serve on the jury. They've already burned through a couple of alternates. They don't have that many more left.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah. How long?
Yeah.
Can a person reasonably be held on a jury? It's like, how many businesses do you have to lose? How much life do you, because I understand the hardship. We all have a duty. That's fine. But when you start to get into months of this, like here's an example.
OJ.
Yeah. Or even just Nate. Nate, you're on a jury now, and it happens to be a year-long jury. How's that doing for your YouTube channel?
Yeah, it's going to suck, but I'm saying that's OJ. Remember, it's funny because they came back so quick because a lot of people thought that they were locked up so long. They were like, we essentially are getting punished for this guy killing somebody.
Right. Well, there has to be some sort of, it's like there's a right to a speedy trial for a defendant. Mm-hmm. Shouldn't there be a right to a reasonable length jury stay? Because a juror didn't even do anything wrong.
No,
they're not even being accused of anything. They just got picked the short straw, showed up to do their duty, and now they're trapped. I mean, this is not an enlistment. They didn't, it's almost like a draft, if you will, that never ends, and that doesn't.
And that you don't get paid for.
No, you don't. I mean, but don't give me that bullshit of every juror gets paid. No, you don't. That's not money. It's a joke. It's not even enough to buy lunch in most places.
I mean, the only thing that helps is that pretty much I assume every state does, but I can't say for sure. But most states have laws like you can't be disciplined, you can't be fired. But if I can't pay the rent for 6 months, like what happens?
Yeah, there you go. Are you protected from not paying rent? But then do you have to pay back? Yeah, and then you have to pay back all that rent anyway, no matter what. Yeah. I think that there's a giant problem with the citizens who have to do this, especially if they're independently employed or what have you. That's a real hardship, and it's legit. Well, hold on.
In New York, though, I can't speak for any place else, but in New York, there are protections against that. Like, say, if you have a year-long trial, for instance, if your job has over a certain amount of people, they have to pay your actual salary while you're going through that time, and then they can get a tax deduction. The business gets a tax deduction for that. If you don't have that, then you could actually.
I think it's only if the business is a certain size. Like if you're a gas station and you employ 3 people, it's like, sorry, bud, you're out the job. I just can't afford you.
No, but then if your business isn't that, I forget, like 50 people or something like that. The number's not that big. But then also the secondary part of it. If your business isn't that small, then the government pays you a certain daily wage. I think the average daily wage is something for that time that you're there. And then you're also you can't be fired for being on jury duty. So they have to hold your job in abeyance, essentially. Or you can sue the company.
Okay, so what about a person who is the job? They're a contractor, independent contractor.
Yeah, I think that's something for you.
Their YouTube
I think unfortunately that sucks for them, but I think generally the law was trying to grab it because most people work jobs, so they're trying to grab as many people, and there are going to be people who are going to be shit out for it. So
then let them be off the jury. Let them refuse the service.
You could say it's going to be a financial hardship because I am the only person in my company and they'll generally let you off. Like in New York, though, there's so many people, they'll let you off or something like that.
Yeah, and that would be for a hardship, but eventually after I've done jury selection, obviously not like in a trial that big, but you get 40, 50 people that are set out for jury duty and, 30 show up. You can burn through 30 people in a morning and you look up and you're like, oh my God, there's only like 2 or 3 more people we can get rid of. And that's it. And that becomes an issue.
Yeah. Especially if the 2 people who are left don't look good for you. Because eventually you run out of what
most of the time they don't look good for the defense. So
I don't know what was it. I was surprised that they pulled me on a jury. I lucked out, but one of the questions they asked me, and I answered truthfully, and I figured I'd be tossed. They said, if you were told a statement from a cop versus a normal person, would you give more weight to the cop's statement? And I said, probably slightly, yes. And they were like, why? And I said, they're trained to observe versus a normal person. And I thought I would be tossed because I was like saying, yeah, well, I probably would value their opinion more, but they're like, and so I'm saying, like, okay, I'm gone. Later on, it's like, oh no, you're there. And it is a crazy thing. It was a murder case, 1st-degree murder of somebody who was accused of murdering his father. Got called in, got impaneled, all that, went back in the room, sitting there, happened to have a hurricane coming.
Ooh.
So they canceled the trial or postponed the trial.
Gave you a life jacket.
And I was off the hook. And I was like, because I was impaneled, I'm off the hook for 3, was off the hook for 3 years or whatever. So it's the best possible result. No, I went there, I showed up. I got picked. That's not my problem that they canceled the trial.
Eric called it a hurricane threat.
I'll take what I can.
Look, it sounds really bad, guys.
The 3 years are up, though. That's the problem. I got something in the mail this year, and I'm like, oh shit.
Yeah. We used to have a lot of reverse. I used to call them reverse Batsons. That's the challenge where if you were getting rid of people because of race. So if you're in the Bronx, because I worked in Brooklyn and I worked in the Bronx.
Yeah.
And the problem is that they like if you have any like if you're in the Bronx, you luck up and have a white person show up to the jury duty, and like 3 or 4 white people, they never last the first like couple of minutes. They always are gone. No, they always jettison the white people off the jury quickly because it's always they are too pro police, right? But soon as that happens, you always get a Batson challenge. Hey, the defendant just wiped off all the white people. And then you're gotta go explain it. So you get a lot of that in Brooklyn and in the Bronx. You get a lot of Batson challenges.
It's that happened to me once. When I was prosecuting, and it's in a fairly rural area, and there was a guy who was Hispanic on the jury and sitting there, and he said he was not favorable to. He seemed like he had to bias against the state. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to get rid of this guy. And he's the only Hispanic guy on the jury, and the defendant's Hispanic. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, I know what this is going to do. And I'm like, I got to do it though. And immediately after that, the defense attorney's like, I got a Batson challenge. And I'm like, God.
Nate, what about that's an actually interesting question because I live in Hampton, Virginia, which is if not a majority black, very close. Yes. So what happens if you're in a community that is made up of almost all a minority group, and there's just not that many quote white people that could be pulled on the jury? How do you deal with that?
That's what I was talking about. And for the Bronx, you had the Batson challenges for white.
Yeah.
Generally, when you think about Batson challenges, it's all for minorities. But in the Bronx and in Brooklyn, it was actually reversed. It was for white people. And the way you deal with that is that you have to the prosecutor or defense, whoever's doing it, has to give a plausible reason why they're saying we don't like this person other than race. And a lot of times, and the people who they kick off, like we had one that was an attorney, too much knowledge of the law, she could become the super juror or something like that. But you have to give a reasonable explanation. Like, I just didn't like them. It's not enough to survive a Batson challenge. You have to give a real reason.
What? Yes. I don't even know how to read. I see these comments or chats coming in. I'm like, I don't even know how to respond or what are you talking about?
Well, Well, and Eric, I mean, and it all depends. I mean, like I've defended cases where like a person, they're from an urban area and they get caught drug trafficking and they're out in the boonies between towns. Guess what? It's all a bunch of farmers show up. It's like, it is what it is. It's just the demographics of that area. And that's not really a Batson challenge. It's just if you happen to be the minority in that area, that's dumb the breaks.
Fine, you got to do your crime in more diverse communities.
It's very real like that. Yes.
Well, you need to be selective in your criminal activities, I guess.
Well, that too. Yes. And if you're going to traffic drugs, you should pre-check your vehicle and make sure everything works before you do it.
All right. Well, you know what? I'm going to close out with this case because I think this is one. As soon as I saw it, there's a guy who sends cases.
Eric, your volume is going. But actually, I have to run real quick because I have a phone call I got to take. But I'll see you guys next week.
Okay. See you, Nate.
All right. This won't take that long. Is my volume back?
Yes.
I don't know what's going on. This is weird.
You went in and out for a second.
Anyway, there's a guy who sends emails in with like, check this out all the time. His name's Keith Carl. Really does some great contributions. But I saw this case. I'm like, we've got to talk about it because there's a lot of crazy questions. There is a South Carolina groom. He just got married. His wife was killed literally after the wedding reception. So only hours after they said, I do. And now the mother is contesting the estate and the marriage itself. Now, this is an interesting question because I feel it's not an obvious answer, especially if you have old world versus new world. For example, you have annulments. There can be an annulment if the marriage is not consummated. So technically, how could it have been consummated if she perished? And I mean, like I said, I think there's actually some interesting questions.
Bathrooms.
Well, there's okay. Maybe it's pre-consummated. I don't know.
Well, no. Maybe I mean, they're at the reception or whatever.
I don't know that consummation is still a thing.
Yeah, that's. I mean,
well, I thought it was for annulment because an annulment is a type of separation of the agreement, and this is why I wanted to talk about it. I talked to Ian Korzai before we started, and he was saying, "Well, that would involve one of the parties claiming it, not necessarily a third party claiming it."
Yes,
but this is. What do you guys think? This is interesting, isn't it?
This is. I mean, it just. It kind of, but it's the bigger point though. When you're in law school, you see this in trust and estates class, where you learn about wills, or even in some of the contract. People fight. Money makes people fight, and I'm sure there's money at stake.
But there's no there's no will. Let's assume there's no will because they were like 30-something years old. Normally, you don't draft the wills before you marry.
Sure.
I mean, sure it happens, but I think most people, it's like they're young, they get married. That's something they look into, especially when they have kids or whatever. It's
what state was this in?
South Carolina.
Now, the reason I ask is because every state has a certain percentage that is allocated for a spouse automatically that would supersede even a will. So even if there was a will, which you're right, a 30-year-old rarely has a will because most few 30-year-olds are concerned about dying anytime soon. But
and this is a valid point too, Billy Marie. I totally agree. The husband did not have anything to do with her death. It was a horrible, horrible thing. Yeah. I think he might have been injured. I don't know, but a drunk driver hit a golf cart that she was riding in, and that's what killed her. He's completely nothing to do with it. So.
Right.
Yeah.
That's significant.
Well, I don't see how he's going to lose this case.
Well, I mean, just like somebody saying Mary case closed, it's like it's not that easy overall. I mean, generally speaking, yes, he's married, he's entitled to things, but if she had made specific devises beforehand in a will, those might still be honorable. But yes, overall, this sounds like the family. I mean, it's a grab for money. Typically.
Oh, good question. Yeah. Okay. That would be not completely uncommon, right? That somebody would have a will and then they get married and then they were going to change the will after the marriage. But would the previous will hold that, or does it get into the marriage?
That's going to be very dependent. But that's generally, it's not with the will that usually happens. That's usually like life insurance policies or transfer on death issues, because those are not governed by a will. Those are just governed by, I forgot to take my ex-wife off my life insurance policy at work, and then you die. Well, guess where the money goes? To the ex-wife, not the current wife. But no, when I see this about the families, though, you see families fight over money. Sometimes there's a lot of money. Sometimes you see families squabble and piss away
all of it on
over the smallest of our pittance. So who really knows? I mean, when people die, it sometimes family members reveal themselves to be pieces of crap too. So
so he's pointing out, it's like, you think your mother-in-law is bad? No.
Yeah.
From a legal perspective, it's hard assuming there is no will. I mean, look, if there's a will, it changes everything here dramatically. But even like I said, even if there is a will, I think he'll get a taste. Usually
he gets
like 30%. He'll get like 30%. Even if there was a will giving her parents everything.
Yeah, he's that get felted.
Yeah, but at the same time, if there is no will, which is one would imagine the most likely scenario here, I think the mother-in-law is going to struggle to get anything. I think she's going to have a difficult time, because even if she had said something that she said pre-death is unlikely to carry any weight. If she said, I bought, grandma gave me this thing, but God forbid if something happens to me, I want you to have it. I want you to have this diamond necklace, that's been in the family. It's very unlikely that something like that would actually carry weight.
This is what it is. Okay, this is interesting. Mandy Mean is saying the mom wants the wrongful death settlement. Husband offered her half and she said no. So this is future money.
Called it.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense, because the woman who was the drunk driver or whatever, her insurance company, I'm sure, could be sued.
They coughed up $1 million.
They are. Well, no, the insurance company is like, what do we got to write? Tell us, here's the policy limit, go away.
Yeah.
Right. But that is still
often $1 million.
Crazy. That's still sort of crazy in a sense that I guess time is irrelevant too. Like, the fact that it was only hours, like literally just said I do, and everything changed.
Yeah.
That is a weird one. It's not like they've been married a year or two, whatever. It's like literally the same day.
Yeah, and
Wow.
like maybe the marriage certificate wasn't signed. Like, who knows how exactly things were set up yet? I don't. But yeah, this just reeks of people wanting money, and that's usually what it is.
But I'll tell you, if it's wrongful death settlement, that it makes the mother-in-law even less likely to get anything. From what we see here,
Yes.
because she couldn't have willed away future earnings. Future.
No.
So
she can't will away also assignment. She can't assign.
Assuming that they were properly legally married, here's the only reason I would think that he might have an issue is a lot of people, like when they're religious, a lot of religious folk may not get married in the eyes of the law at the same time that prior to the actual marriage ceremony. I'll tell you right now, I legally married my wife over I was a year and a half after I got married. And in the way we look at marriage, having a Jewish wedding. So if those T's hadn't been crossed or some of those I's had not been dotted, in that case, she could contest the marriage based on a failure to properly record it in the eyes of the state. In which case, she could theoretically get everything. And perhaps if she's being so insistent about getting all the money, she feels that there's a reason to question that. And now you're walking into really interesting territory where you have a religious ceremony, but it's not. But it's not, and that's all concluded, but you don't have the legal marriage. That would to me, that's almost likely to be the scenario here, because otherwise the attorneys and the mother-in-law likely would just say, grab what you can, because you're on weak footing here.
Yeah. Don't you have a problem in your society, if you will, with that, the divorce issue, where like husbands want divorces, but they can't get the religious part or whatever it is? I don't know, but I've heard that there's some.
Well, in the eyes of Jewish law, only a husband can. The husband has carte blanche on issuing divorce. So, so it's called.
Yes, I watched Sopranos. Yes.
Yeah, that's right. It's actually season 1, episode 5 of Sopranos.
Tony has to figure it out. Yes.
Tony has to try and basically figure out how to get a husband to give his wife a divorce. And by the way, that's not unheard of. Going back centuries, the concept of thugs basically being hired to go after an incalcitrant husband who's being a dick about it. That they basically would beat the hell out of him.
And I saw people in chat talking about like prenups and all these other things. There is no such thing. A bulletproof vest is not gonna always stop a bullet. Parachutes don't always open. Do they open most of the time? Yes. But every document, no document is bulletproof. No document is 100% perfect. So, some of those things may work, but
I'll bet anything
they don't work a lot.
That they didn't get.
Well, I understand there's probably none of that.
I would bet anything there's some issue in the eyes of the law with their marriage, and that they probably have a religious ceremony, and that there's something lacking there. Because the reason I'm saying that, the reason I'm so confident about that, is because otherwise the attorneys for the mother-in-law would have had her settle this thing.
Well, that or the attorneys would have said, "You've got nothing. I'm not going to get sanctioned for filing a nonsense lawsuit."
Right. So that's why I'm saying, unless there's some reason for them to say, you know what, she's not legally married, and there's not going to be palimony here because they're not married, they haven't been together, and that would be why he would offer half. Otherwise, his attorneys would be like, "Why are you offering half? That's ridiculous."
Because he's a nice guy.
Yeah, okay. And I'm saying and she's still saying no. To me, this smells like there's an issue with the legal end of their marriage, and that they probably have a valid religious ceremony, but there's something lacking in the eyes of the law, which is what's creating this schism here.
It's going to look like a law school problem eventually when all the facts come out.
Probably. I don't know, and that is a good question, Joe. And there's nothing, in the one Fox News article that I see showing that. And how do I know by names? I think the name is Miller. That tells me nothing.
Maybe Alec Murdoch with this. Down South Carolina.
I don't know. I just thought it was an interesting case, and
no, it is. That's
good one to wrap up on.
It is.
Yeah.
But let's go ahead and wrap up. And Sean, what do you have going on?
Keep your eyes peeled. I got a video coming out. It's about a guy who was determined to be too fat to have committed the crime he was accused of. And because of this, it caused him, he got acquitted, but the cost, I'm not sure is worth it because it became a very personal issue. So you'll have to see.
Now,
what exactly happened.
You whetted my appetite. That sounds really intriguing. It's like, could he squeeze into the murderer suit?
It's actually it's even more embarrassing than that, I think.
That's pretty funny.
Far more embarrassing.
That's wow. All right, when's that dropping?
Hopefully I can get it done today.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
Right.
And Trump trial, good logic guy. We got you over 1,000 on Trump trial, didn't we?
Yes, I haven't, and I haven't checked today. I know that I was at 3,800 hours, which I had to get to 4,000 to get monetized on the Trump trial. But that was before I streamed the debate the other day. So I'm positive I'm over 4,000 hours. I'm just waiting for YouTube to give me clearance on that before I can submit my application for monetization on that channel.
What did you guys think of the debate? Sorry, I'm going to hijack it. What did you think? Do you go with the mainstream press that Vivek Ramaswamy is just a thug and a bully and a complete jerk? And
I thought he dominated. That was
I'm fine with him. I'm fine with him burning down Nikki Haley. I think he's got his own issues, but if he's going to be the hatchet man right now to take care of all the neocons, that's fine with me.
It's interesting. I'd love to hear your issues with him, because one of the things I pointed out in that stream that I never really expressed prior there too was that a lot of people look at him and see like a used car salesman type of vibe. And that's what they take away from him, that they think that he's full of crap and that he's not going to do any things that he says. And my thought is, what he expresses is far more consistent with my perspectives about how things should be done. And some of the things he was expressing there, which is one of the reasons I first started being drawn to him, was that we all know that Congress is basically the incalcitrant the partner who you're never going to get them to go along unless you happen to be fortunate enough to have a supermajority. And he has all these different plans to operate and change things from within in areas that are exclusively under the president's domain, and use those weapons, use those tools, like hatching away at the executive branch and kind of firing the FBI and
merging organizations
and all these different ways that he doesn't need congressional approval, which really could make some systemic changes in the way in some of the crap and corruption that we see going on in our governance. So, and my thought is this: do I know that he's telling the truth? No, but if he does 20% of what he's describing, in that case, he's already better than virtually anyone in my mind, other than perhaps Trump. And what do you think, he's going to take off the mask and all of a sudden he's AOC? Like, what's his motivation to be lying and then just do the exact opposite of everything he's saying? It sounds kind of crazy. What?
Like Obama? Anyway, I'm just a post-race president that brought racism back bigger than ever before. That something like that. But anyway,
I mean, I guess he could take off he could take off his thing, and all of a sudden he's Adam Schiff. But it's hard for me to believe that he's more likely to be that than any of these others who seem to be strongly uniparty. So.
Well, he could be uniparty the second he goes in. I mean, that would probably be the most logical thing that happened. We've seen a lot of people who seem to be outsiders. As soon as they get in, it's like they get a talking to, and all of a sudden, they're not quite the outsider that they seemed. Right. The issue I have with him is just a very simple one, and it just troubles me. I always look at things that show deception or something else, and they trigger me, and I start to look where are other things. So way back in about April timeframe, somewhere in there, he and his campaign changed his Wikipedia article. And what bothered me about it is they changed it to remove the Soros reference. Yes, I know it's not George. I know it's George's brother. I know all of that. And they changed it to remove a WEF reference and then a few other things.
He actually sued over that.
He sued over that. Okay, so here we go. Let me finish it out. Removing the Soros brothers reference because he took a scholarship from that foundation. I have no issue that he took a scholarship from the Soros Foundation. being the brother, whatever. I don't even have an issue if he was pro George Soros. I don't care if it was George Soros himself gave him a check for a scholarship. What I don't like is when you remove references because they may look bad, and then when you are confronted about it, your campaign responds with, "Oh, we corrected some misspellings and errors, but we didn't do anything to cover." Now, if you're going to cover up, and this is where it bothers me. Again, I don't. Again, if he was buddies with George Soros, if he worked for the man directly, and took a scholarship, and he said, "Look, that was then, this is now. I don't like the guy." Or I took the scholarship, you're misrepresenting it. But when you erase that, what else are you erasing that triggers me? Not long later, there is a video of him as a young man. You know how they, in the old debates in 2004 or whatever, they would call up, people, from the community to ask questions of the candidates. Well, there happened to be two people called. One of them is the Treasury Secretary now, and the other one was Vivek Ramaswamy, which is very interesting. Very, very interesting parallel. So he was being groomed early on, and all of these things make me go, Now, do I like listening to him?
Pete Buttigieg and Vivek.
Buttigieg, yeah, I have trouble saying.
Buttigieg was the other guy who was.
Yes, it was him and Pete. Yes.
Wow.
And
I didn't know that. I saw that clip of him. Who was
there's a picture. It's creepy. Yeah, hold on. Here, I got it. It's a hardball. It's from Hardball. Here you go.
Did you put it in the chat?
I'm going to share it. I'm going to share it.
And
this is creepy.
And again, it doesn't necessarily mean, but all these things, they're very, very odd. And when you have these two side by side, you just have to say that's some really interesting company. Now, does that mean anything? Not specifically, but I just have trouble. And the fact is, Joe, you said something a few months back. I wasn't on the show. Nate was running it, but I was listening, and you said that you worried that Vivek was so smart, he might be too smart for you to figure out. And I love how you put it that way.
Yeah.
And he is a brilliant guy and a great orator. No, I'm not going to say just like Obama, because I think Obama sucked. In my opinion, I never liked listening to him. But I think he says everything so perfectly. And I'm of the mindset, like, every time somebody sends me a meme or they send me some sort of email or article, such and such happened, and I'm like, oh yeah, that would be just like them. And it sounds so great. It rings in my heart. I go, okay, it's probably bullshit. And then it takes me 10 seconds to go look and go, yeah, it's bullshit, because it sounds too good to me. That's the problem I have with him.
That Pete Buttigieg thing is I had seen the Vivek element to that and that question. It was Al Sharpton, right, in the 2004. Yeah, and the question that he asked was something like, "Why should I trust an outsider?" or something like that. I think that was the question, which basically was a question that he's faced many times. So, which is kind of funny. But
Ray J's right. Did he realize he's being groomed and rebelled? Maybe. Tell me that. Don't just tailor your message to what we want to hear. I want to hear your journey. David Horowitz was an actually avowed communist, and he's one of the most hardcore conservatives now. Thomas Sowell started out as a socialist, and he is a conservative now. So I have no problem. People have journeys. My partner, Mark Robert, he was a complete leftist, voted for Hillary more times than anybody, voted for Obama both times, etc. He's completely MAGA.
Interesting.
So I have no problems with people, shifting over time. God, if you don't shift, fine. But
right. No, I'll tell you this much. I think that there's been this whole reflection of our society over the last, we've seen in our society, where there's this polarization of otherizing, where it's like you're either in my camp or you're the enemy. Sure. And we've seen it in left versus right, and we're seeing it now in the primaries of like DeSantis versus Trump versus Vivek or Haley, whatever, and we're seeing this polarization happening. And I think that if people have legitimate issues, which what you're raising here sounds like really, justifiable bases to have an issue with a particular candidate. Totally get that, and I'm on board with that. I think that your instincts there are reflecting refinement in your process of selectivity. So meaning it's not, I have deep respect for every issue you just raised now. I think those are legitimate things to be raising. I have concerns when I see people that seem to be like, well, you're anti-Trump, therefore you're evil and you have to be obliterated, or you're anti-DeSantis and therefore you have to be obliterated. And I can't trust anyone who's against my guy. I can't, and I have to bash them. And I think that's such a terrible way to look at politics. It's bad enough that that's how our politicians look at things. There's no reason for the public to view it in a similar type of light. And I think that's happened and I think we've been triggered and prepped to feel that way, to become that tribal. And I think it's a very unhealthy thing. And that's why I try to discourage people from just being like, well, look, I understand this is not your top choice. So that doesn't mean this is a person that we should just shelve forever. But the issues you're raising, legitimate issues. Those are very legitimate issues. Like as far as creating distrust rather than owning your mistakes of the past, but to pretend that they never happened. That's a reason that creates a lack of credibility, which is something that should be of grave concern.
Yeah, and that's it. I mean, I love listening to him. Believe me, I'm so entertained when he's shredding. I mean, what was it? The heels remark, and then there was such a perfect setup for the latest one because Nikki Haley jumped all over. He has a woman problem. It's like, no, he has a heels problem because the other one wearing heels was DeSantis. So he's funny, he's glib, he's quick. All these things are great. Yeah. But again, when you like Trump, one of the refreshing things about Trump was, yeah, you can't trust these people. I know because I paid them, because I was in there. I was donating. I was at Hillary's wedding. But he's pretty blatant about, I know this is going because I did that. And that was, I think, the refreshing part. So we'll see. And does that mean I would never vote for the guy? Let's say it all fell apart, whatever. I'm just telling you, like if it's between Nikki Haley and Vivek, there's no question. Yeah. Because there'd just be the hope. Oh now, God. And I would start to have more trouble between Vivek and DeSantis. And I don't even like DeSantis that much. I like him as a governor, but now I have problems because I go, okay, I have a guy, DeSantis, where he's a great governor. So now we've got that on the record. At least I could say that there is that. I know as a governor, he is pretty solid. Mm-hmm. And I got Vivek, who I really like what he says, but I just haven't trust. Now I'm going to have problems. I'm going to have problems on which way to go. If those things I told you about didn't happen, I would just go Vivek the whole way. But whenever I see that, little things trigger me. Things trigger me.
These and it's fair, and that's fair. And these are things. You know what? He's not going to win now. DeSantis is not going to win now. I think we all can recognize that Trump, unless barring some calamitous type of health issue with Trump, he's going to win the nomination.
Sure. So, but Vivek is 37. Right. Keep that in mind. He's only 2 years eligible. He's got 40 more years.
And that's
he's
the thing.
Not going away.
You know what? We're going to have another 4 years to examine this guy. That's my point. We're going to have another 4 years to get a better feel for what he's about and what he really believes and where he really stands on things. So, and I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing for America to start really having a lengthy opportunity to watch this guy. Because look.
And we should.
Yeah, he has potential to be a star, but he could be a complete scam artist, and like I said long ago, this guy might be Rasputin and he's just he knows what to say to us and he's pitching it well. Or he has potential to actually be what he claims to be. And if so, he's the next great white hope.
We'll see what he looks like in March 2025.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I actually want to see what he looks like in 2020 because then he'll have gone around enough where the messages, let's see if the consistency builds. Again, I'm not ruling him out. I'm just telling you I'm troubled. And that's why I think that feeds people.
One of the reasons I look at him, I've pushed him well ahead of DeSantis. I used to love DeSantis. One of the reasons I pushed him well ahead of him is because he has the cojones and the fortitude of or has at least expressed sufficient fortitude in his conviction toward American values that he has fully backed Trump on all these charges and come out lambasting the other side. And there's not a single other Republican candidate who's done that with any sort of form of genuine conviction.
Ironically, the two most consistent candidates, if we're going to do that, is him and Christie.
Right, but
because he's no, the opposite. No, because Christie has been 100% screw Trump. He's bad. I hate him, but he has been consistent, and Vivek has been consistently pro-Trump on pretty much all that.
Right. And now look, maybe he was just being shrewd and recognized that Trump's going to win this thing anyway, and I want to set myself up as his.
Oh, he has been shrewd. He's not. He hasn't had a single policy against Trump. He's running, but it's like they're in lanes. Okay, everything he's picking
it's traveling in his wake. He's traveling in his wake.
Oh, absolutely. He's been running for vice president the whole time. In my opinion,
I don't know if he wants to be vice president. I don't know if politically it'd be wise for him to be vice president because he's already so neatly aligned with Trump. He doesn't need to be vice president to carry that, because with being his vice president, there's obviously a certain benefit and there's also a certain taint from the other side of the aisle that you're going to need some of them to vote for you. So I don't know that he necessarily would want to be, whether that's politically astute or whether Trump. I don't think Trump would want him. I don't think Trump. I think Trump.
No, he's too much of a threat. You don't want your vice president
to be
who could outshine you.
Yeah, exactly. He's too charming.
You need a Mike Pence, somebody who's boring. Consider this.
It's like Carrie Lake won't be chosen either because
I don't think she will. I think that would be a bad choice. But like George H.W. Bush, okay, I go CIA and everything. So who did he pick? Quayle. Nobody is going to want to get rid of Bush for Quayle. Who did Biden pick? Kamala. Nobody wants to get rid of Biden for Kamala. And nobody, I'm talking to a lot of people who can't stand Biden, but is there anybody here saying, please, let's impeach and convict him so we can get Kamala as president? Raise your hand.
No,
a smart person is going to pick somebody who will not overshadow them. Even W picked Cheney. Yeah. And that was an interesting pick because Cheney, some consider to be the puppet master president, but nobody wanted him over W.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but okay, Joe, what do you have going up? Sorry, I ran over with all this.
Oh, I don't know. I'll tell you. I'll tell you on tomorrow night what I'm covering tomorrow night.
Okay. Well, on that note, normally I like to cut Joe off, but we just had a great conversation. And folks, you know what? I was hoping to get to 25,000 last week. I think we got to 24,990.
Hit the subscribe button. This guy's killing himself here, for crying out loud. For crying out loud. YouTube doesn't like him, so you should. That's why you should. Hit the freaking like and subscribe. Send it to your friends. There's nowhere else on the internet that you get panels like this of different attorneys who actually have some level of personality, exchanging deep insight and humor and comedy and talking about events du jour. So make sure you sub up to Layback News and tell your friends that they're losers.
I'll never cut you off with this. So if the plan is to cut off, no. If you're singing my praises on the channel, no, I'll let you go all day. So everybody, thank you so much. And if you do like this, do it every Friday. I get amazing people. I'm really blessed to have all of you. Consider subscribing, and we'll see you next week.
Godspeed.